My name is Marilyn Hargrove, and I was 71 years old the day a doctor I'd never met before handed me a diagnosis like a receipt. 6 months. Maybe less. I want to tell you the worst part wasn't the diagnosis. The worst part came 4 days later, when I found the real estate listing agreement for my house sitting in my son's email, already drafted, already dated, waiting only for my signature and my death. Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories, where women who were underestimated finally get the last quiet word. If you've ever had someone start counting your things before you'd even finished counting your days, drop a comment and stay with me. And subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this ends. I spent 38 years as a probate paralegal. Not a lawyer. Never wanted to be one. But for 38 years I sat 2 feet from the attorneys at Boss and Merrick, and I read wills the way other women read novels, cover to cover, looking for the twist nobody saw coming. I drafted the language. I calendared the deadlines. I sat across from grieving families and watched, more times than I can count, the exact moment grief turned into arithmetic. You'd think that would make me cynical about my own children. It didn't. For a long time it made me careful instead. I kept clean books. I kept my will updated every 5 years like a woman changing the batteries in a smoke detector, not because she expects a fire, but because she's seen what happens to the people who don't. My husband Walter died 9 years ago. Congestive heart failure, slow and then sudden, the way it usually goes. We had 2 children. Gregory, my son, 44 now, an insurance adjuster, married to a woman named Whitney who sells real estate and has never once, in 12 years, called it just a job. And my daughter, Denise, 41, a dental hygienist, married to Marcus, quieter than the rest of them, the kind of quiet that I've learned to watch closely. I lived alone in the house Walter and I paid off in 2011. 3 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a garden. I still worked on my knees every spring even after the knees stopped thanking me for it. I want you to understand something about me before I tell you the rest, because what's coming is going to make you angry at my children, and I don't want you angrier at them than I eventually was. I was not a burden. I drove myself everywhere. I paid every bill on time. I still did the Sunday crossword in pen. The only thing wrong with me, as far as I or anyone else knew, was a stubborn cough I'd had for 6 weeks that I finally, at Denise's nagging, agreed to get checked out. That appointment is where this story starts. I didn't see my regular doctor that day. Dr. Okafor was on leave, and the clinic slotted me in with a locum physician I'd never met, a Dr. Reeve, young, rushed, reading my chest CT off a laptop balanced on his knee. He didn't sit down. Mrs. Hargrove, I'm going to be direct with you, he said. The imaging shows a mass consistent with advanced pancreatic involvement. Given the staging, we're typically looking at a prognosis of 4 to 6 months. I remember the room went very quiet, the way rooms do when they're about to become permanent in your memory. I asked him 3 questions. What's the confirming test? Who's my oncologist? When do I see them? He gave me a folder and a name and told me the oncology office would call within the week. I drove myself home. I did not cry in the parking lot, though I sat there for 11 minutes before I trusted my hands to hold the wheel. I called Denise first, because Denise is the one who nags me into doctor's appointments, and I thought she deserved to hear it from me and not from a chart. She cried. She said all the right things. She said, "Mom, I'm coming over," and she did, that same night, with a casserole and red eyes. I called Gregory the next morning. There was a pause on the line, longer than grief usually takes. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. Do you want us to come this weekend? Whitney and I could come Saturday. We could all sit down and figure things out." Figure things out. I noted the phrase the way I used to note phrases in depositions, not because it was damning on its own, but because it was the kind of sentence that meant something specific to the person saying it, even if they didn't know it yet. Saturday came. They arrived together, Gregory, Whitney, Denise, Marcus, a family meeting assembled with an efficiency that, I'll admit, I found almost touching at first. We sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd helped both of them with algebra homework. Whitney had brought a folder. Of course she had. "We just want to make this easier for you," she said, opening it before I'd even poured the coffee. "There's so much administrative stuff that piles up at a time like this, and none of us want you dealing with paperwork on top of everything else." "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. "Just logistics," Gregory said, not looking at me. "Power of attorney, so bills don't lapse if you're in and out of treatment. Maybe looking at the house, whether it makes sense to simplify things now instead of later, so it's not a scramble for anybody." For anybody. I sat with that sentence a long moment. "I appreciate you wanting to help," I said carefully. "But I haven't even had the confirming biopsy yet. I don't have an oncologist. I don't have a treatment plan. I don't have a prognosis I trust enough to plan a funeral around, let alone sell a house around." Whitney's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. "Of course," she said. "We just want to be prepared." "You always taught us to be prepared, didn't you, Marilyn?" She wasn't wrong. I had taught them that. I just hadn't expected to watch it used against me at my own kitchen table 4 days after a diagnosis I hadn't even confirmed. If you've ever felt the room start planning your absence while you were still very much sitting in it, type "I see it" in the comments. I promise you it gets worse before it gets better. The oncology office called Tuesday. My appointment for the confirming biopsy and full staging workup was set for the following Monday, 9 days out. 9 days is a long time to sit with a 6-month sentence and an empty afternoon. I used some of it the way I'd used 38 years of afternoons. I read paperwork. My grandson Caleb, Denise's boy, 26, in his second year of law school and clerking part-time at a firm downtown, came by that Thursday to mow my lawn, the way he'd done every week since Walter died. Caleb has always been the one who checks on me because he wants to, not because someone assigned him the chore. He was quiet the whole time he worked. When he came in for lemonade, he sat down across from me at the table and didn't drink it. "Grandma," he said, "can I ask you something weird?" "You can ask me anything." "Has anyone talked to you about listing the house?" I set my glass down very carefully. "Why do you ask that?" He looked miserable. "I was at Mom and Dad's Tuesday night, and Whitney called Mom while I was there, and Mom put it on speaker because she was cooking, and I heard, Grandma, I heard Whitney say she'd already pulled comps on this street. She said something about listing before the end of the year would beat a tax reassessment. And then she said..." He stopped. "Say it," I told him. Slowly. She said, "Better to move on it now while things are still simple, before it turns into 6 people fighting over a probate court date." 6 people fighting over a probate court date. I had heard variations of that sentence, professionally, perhaps 400 times in my career. I had typed it into memos. I had watched it destroy families from a very safe, very clean distance, 3 feet back from the fire, taking notes. I had never once expected to be the file. "There's more," Caleb said, and I could see it cost him something to keep going. "Uncle Greg's been at the office a lot with his laptop open to something. I saw it over his shoulder when I dropped something off for Mom. It looked like a listing agreement. It had your address on it, Grandma. And a date already filled in." "What date?" "December 4th. Today was November 19th. I want to tell you I felt fury in that moment. What I actually felt was something colder and more familiar, the sensation, 38 years deep in my bones, of a file that didn't add up, and the specific quiet that comes right before you decide to go find out exactly how much it doesn't add up. "You did the right thing telling me," I said. "I need you to do one more thing, and only if you're comfortable." "Anything. If you see that document again, a screenshot, a printout, anything with a date and my address on it, I need a copy. Not because I want to hurt your uncle. Because I need to know what I'm dealing with before Monday." Caleb nodded, jaw tight. He looked, in that moment, exactly like his grandfather. 3 days later he sent me a photograph, taken quickly, slightly blurred, of a screen. A residential listing agreement, my address, the seller line pre-filled with my full legal name, a commission structure I recognized instantly as Whitney's standard rate, and a listing date of December 4th. Prepared November 14th. 10 days after my diagnosis. 5 days before my confirming biopsy. I sat with that photograph a long time. Then I called my oldest friend, a woman named Harriet Voss, who happened to also be the managing partner of the firm I'd worked at for 38 years, and who happened to also owe me approximately 400 favors from every deposition I'd ever prepped her for at midnight. "Harriet," I said. "I need to talk to you about a will. Mine. If you've ever had to become the lawyer in your own life story because nobody else was going to protect you, comment still standing below. We're getting to the good part." Monday came. The biopsy came with it, along with a full-body PET scan and a panel of blood work that took most of the day. I sat in that waiting room and thought about the listing agreement dated December 4th, and I thought about a sentence I'd read 1,000 times in other people's files and never once expected to write about my own. The decedent's intentions were never actually confirmed before the family proceeded. I was not, as it turned out, going to be a decedent quite yet. But I didn't know that on Monday. On Monday I only knew that the appointment ran long, that the radiologist kept looking at something on a second screen with a frown that seemed less like confirmation and more like confusion, and that when I finally sat down with Dr. Anika Patel, the actual oncologist, 3 days later, she did not open with a number. She opened with a question. "Mrs. Hargrove, can you tell me who ordered your original CT and what facility read it?" I told her. She was quiet a moment, pulling something up. "I want to be very careful here," she said, "because I don't want to give you false hope any more than I wanted the previous read to give you false despair. But your biopsy is clean. There is no malignancy in the pancreatic tissue. What the original imaging flagged as a mass consistent with advanced disease appears, on our reread, to be a benign cystic lesion, fairly common, not urgent, manageable with monitoring." I sat very still. "I don't understand," I said, though I did, "in the way you understand a thing before your body catches up to your mind." "There was a labeling error at the outside facility," she said gently. 2 patients' imaging got cross-referenced in the same batch that week. I've already flagged it to their radiology department. I'm sorry you carried this for 2.5 weeks. You shouldn't have. 2.5 weeks. I want you to sit with the timeline the way I had to. I received a diagnosis on a Tuesday. By that Saturday, 4 days later, my family was sitting at my kitchen table discussing power of attorney and simplifying the house. By the following Thursday, 10 days after diagnosis, a listing agreement bearing my name and address was drafted with a closing date of December 4th. And I did not have cancer at all. They had not waited for a confirming test. They had not waited for an oncologist. They had not, as far as I could tell, waited for very much of anything at all. I did not tell them right away that I was clear. I know how that sounds. I want to explain it anyway. I needed one more piece of paper before I said a word, and Harriet got it to me by the following Monday, a full, notarized, ironclad set of documents locking every account, every deed, and every power of attorney designation solely to me and to Harriet as my named legal backup, effective immediately, revoking any prior informal understanding. There had never been a formal prior understanding. That was rather the point. Nobody had ever asked me to sign one. They'd simply proceeded as though the outcome were settled and the paperwork was a formality to be handled quietly, on their own timeline, on my behalf. I called a family dinner for that Friday. I told them I had my results and I wanted to share them together, as a family, over the meal I'd been cooking us on Sundays for 30 years. Whitney offered, with what I can only describe as visible relief, to bring the good wine. They arrived at 6. I'd made the pot roast. I set the table the way I always had, Walter's chair left at the head, out of habit more than sentiment now. Gregory looked nervous in a way I hadn't seen since he was 16 and had wrecked my car. Denise kept touching my arm, asking if I was tired, if I needed anything, if I was eating enough. Marcus said very little, which I'd learn later was its own kind of tell. Whitney arrived with the wine and a smile so bright it had the texture of something rehearsed. We ate. We made small talk about Caleb's law school applications, about the weather, about nothing, while a folder sat closed beside my plate and nobody but me and Caleb, who I'd asked to be there, knew what was in it. When the plates were cleared, Whitney leaned forward first. "So," she said gently, folding her hands. "How was the appointment, Marilyn? What did Dr. Patel say?" I looked around the table at all of them. "Before I answer that," I said, "I want to talk about a different appointment. One I didn't have. One none of us had." Gregory's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" he said. "I mean the appointment where somebody sat down with me and asked what I actually wanted done with my house, my accounts, and my remaining time, before drafting paperwork with a stranger's commission rate attached to my name." The table went very still. "Mom," Gregory started. "Let me finish," I said, and I reached for the folder. "Tab 1, I said, and I want you to know I said it the way I'd said it 1,000 times across conference tables in my career, level, unhurried, entirely without malice, which somehow makes it land harder than shouting ever could. I opened it. This is a residential listing agreement for this house. My address. My legal name pre-filled on the seller line. A commission rate that happens to match yours exactly, Whitney. Dated for a closing on December 4th. I turned the page so they could all see it. It was prepared on November 14th. 10 days after a diagnosis I had not yet had confirmed by a single oncologist. 5 days before my biopsy. Whitney's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "That was just a draft," she said. "Preliminary. We weren't going to actually list it without talking to you." "Then why," I said, still level, "does it have a signature line pre-formatted for me, and why was it dated for a closing 4 weeks after a diagnosis you had no confirmed timeline for whatsoever?" Nobody answered that. "Tab 2, I said, and turned the page again. "This is a call log, Gregory. From your mother's kitchen table, the Saturday after my diagnosis. Figure things out, you said. Power of attorney, so bills don't lapse. Simplifying the house. 4 days after a diagnosis, before I'd seen a single oncologist, my own son was already discussing power of attorney over my accounts. That's not, Mom, that's completely normal estate planning. People do that all the time when someone's sick." I was trying to help. "I know what normal estate planning looks like, Gregory," I said, and for the first time my voice had an edge in it, thin, but there. "I did it professionally for 38 years. Normal estate planning starts with a conversation asking the person what they want. It does not start with a listing agreement drafted by your wife's brokerage before your mother has even had a biopsy." Denise had started crying quietly. Marcus had gone very pale and very still, staring at his plate like it might offer an exit. "Tab 3, I said. I looked at Denise. "Your son gave me this, not to betray you, but because he loves me more than he was willing to protect a comfortable silence." Caleb overheard a phone call. "Whitney told you, Denise, that listing before year-end would beat a tax reassessment and would be simpler than, and I'm quoting, 6 people fighting over a probate court date." Denise looked at her son. Caleb didn't look away. "You were planning my probate before I'd finished my chemo consult," I said. "Before I'd finished it, because I never started it. Because there was nothing to treat." The silence that followed lasted longer than anything else that night. "What did Dr. Patel say?" Whitney finally asked, very quietly, and I understood in that question exactly what she was actually asking, not "Are you okay?" but "How much time do we actually have to fix this?" "There was a lab error," I said. 2 patients' scans were cross-referenced. "I don't have cancer. I have a benign cyst that requires monitoring and, apparently, a family that requires rather more than that." I watched the relief and the horror arrive on their faces at almost exactly the same time, fighting for the same real estate, and losing to a third expression underneath both of them, the recognizable look of people realizing they'd shown you who they were before they'd had the decency to wait and see if it mattered. Mom, we would never actually have listed it without your say, Gregory said, and his voice cracked, and I believed that he half believed it himself. Then you should have waited to draft it, I said. The difference between a family that plans responsibly and a family that plans opportunistically isn't the paperwork, Gregory. It's the order of operations. You did the paperwork first and the asking never came at all. Here's how it settled out over the months that followed, because I know you want the ledger and not just the feeling. I did not disown anyone. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been easy, and for about a week I genuinely considered it. What I did instead was quieter and, I think, more lasting. I kept Harriet's documents in place. Every account, every deed, every power of attorney, locked to me and to Harriet alone, reviewable only through her office, with a clause requiring any future estate planning conversation to happen with me present, sober, and asked directly, never drafted first and presented for signature after. I told Whitney, in front of everyone, that she was welcome at my table for exactly as long as she understood that my house was not, and never would be, her listing to lose. She heard me. Whether she liked it is a separate question from whether she understood it, and I've stopped needing those two things to be the same. Gregory came to see me alone about 10 days later. He didn't bring paperwork. He brought himself, which was the first time in longer than I care to admit that he'd shown up with nothing to offer but an apology. I was scared, he said. I didn't know how to be the person handling everything, so I let Whitney handle it, and I told myself that was the same as handling it myself. It wasn't, I said. But it's something, that you can see the difference now. He cries easily, my son, always has, even as a boy. He cried then. I let him. Denise's marriage, I'll tell you honestly, did not survive the winter. Not because of that dinner alone, there were other things underneath it that dinner simply made visible, the way a low tide shows you what's been sitting on the bottom the whole time. Marcus's silence at that table, it turned out, wasn't discomfort. It was complicity, and once Denise saw it clearly, she couldn't unsee it. She filed for divorce in February. I helped her find an attorney who wasn't me and wasn't Harriet, because some things a mother shouldn't handle even when she's qualified to. Caleb finished his second year of law school with the highest marks in his class. I paid for none of it. He didn't ask, and that, more than anything else that happened this year, is the inheritance I actually care about protecting. The cyst, for the record, remains exactly what it was, benign, monitored twice a year, entirely unremarkable, except for what it revealed about everyone standing around it. I still live in the house. Nobody's name is on a listing agreement but mine, and it's going to stay that way for as long as I have any say in the matter, which, as it turns out, is considerably longer than 6 months. I still do the Sunday crossword and pen. I still cook the pot roast, though the table's a little smaller now, and I've made my peace with that. Here's what I've learned, and I'll leave it with you because I think some of you needed to hear it as much as I did. Grief is real, and fear is real, and none of us know how we'll behave the day someone we love gets a number attached to their remaining time. I don't ask my children to be perfect in the face of that fear. What I ask, what I think anyone deserves to ask, is that the people who claim to love you wait for the facts before they start dividing the furniture. A family that plans responsibly asks first and drafts second. A family that plans opportunistically drafts first and asks whether it's allowed to call it love. I know the difference now. I always did, professionally. I just never expected to need to know it personally. If you've ever had someone start counting your things before you'd even finished counting your days, I hope you found your own folder, your own tab one, your own quiet moment of turning the page and letting the paper speak for you. Type I see it one more time if you made it this far with me. And subscribe, because next week, I'm telling you about the letter my husband left me, the one nobody else in this family knows exists yet. I'll see you then.